Okay, hi everybody. Jen Morand here with the Chicago Auto Show. It's so nice to see John Davis' face from MotorWeek here with us as well today. Typically, we would be at the Chicago Auto Show. However, due to COVID, we are postponing our show sadly. So this is the second best thing, and we are just excited to be in contact. So, hi John, welcome.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having me on. And if it's any consolation to you in Chicago, it's snowing gangbusters here in Maryland too. So, that's the one thing we share this year, even though we can't share location. I miss it. I have to tell you, there's nothing this time of year. We have to be in Chicago for our Driver's Choice Awards. So it was really different this year. And I can't wait for this all to be over and get back to normal next year.
You and me both, and I think all of our listeners tuning in can share that same sentiment. So, no, we hope to be back at it soon. But in the meantime, we have this great opportunity to speak with you today. Would love to hear your thoughts specifically around your Driver's Choice Awards, which were just announced yesterday via live video. So if you haven't checked it out yet, definitely head to MotorWeek's page to do that. But I don't want to steal your thunder. Let's just dive right in. So like I said yesterday, they announced the Driver's Choice Awards, and it was the Ford Mustang Mach-E, which is getting a lot of accolades now. So probably not a huge shock, but I just wanted to hear, John, from you, what your thoughts are on the Mach-E. And, it was a fan favorite last year at the Chicago Auto Show 2020. We had it on display in the Ford exhibit. But can you share the reasons that you feel the Mach-E is deserving of your prestigious award?
Yeah, Jen, and there really are a lot. I mean, when the car was, and I'll be honest with you, when I first heard, and I know we're going to talk about this, that they were going to take the hallowed Mustang names and the Mach name for that matter, and use them on an electric vehicle, I was a little like, okay, where are we going with this? Then they basically rolled it out. We all had a chance to crawl through it and get a good look at it. And I just think the designers did a masterful job at getting a lot of that Mustang DNA to the exterior, more so the exterior than the interior, but to the exterior. And then basically when you finally had a chance to drive it, as we did, you realize that this is not just some poser. This is a vehicle that has got that Mustang flavor all through it. It goes well, it handles well. Again, we can talk about that more later. So the engineers at Ford and the designers at Ford really embrace the essence of this 55 plus year American icon Mustang and brought it into the 21st century in a huge way, meeting all of the future aspirations of electric vehicles and a lot of the connectivity and issues that we're looking at is for autonomous vehicles and a lot of that. This is like laying the groundwork for it so that the Mustang brand will be able to live and indeed flourish in the future. So the whole package, great looking. All the numbers that Ford was talking about, which have come to reality, very impressive, worthy of any kind of performance car. I don't care how it is powered, but it really was. Our awards are called the Driver's Choice Awards because they are vehicles we love to drive. And when we, as a staff, got a chance to spend a lot of time driving the Mach-E, we realized that this was far from just being another electric car. And it wasn't just even an electric car that had the right kind of styling. It was a total package and stood out from all the rest. And that's why it not only won its category, Best Eco-Friendly Vehicle, but we picked it hands down as our very best driver's choice car of the year.
Okay, so now I have to ask because this topic is somewhat controversial. We heard it at the Chicago Auto Show last year. I hear it on social media all the time.
We do too.
But why do you think Ford decided to tie the Mustang nameplate to a vehicle that arguably doesn't really look much like a Mustang at all?
Well, if you look at, I'll beg to differ with people on that last point, because if you look at the profile of the two vehicles, just look at the profile. They are incredibly similar. Yes, the Mach-E is taller because it is, after all, an SUV slash utility, but they are very similar and a lot of the same styling cues. But I really think the question has to be, why did it take Ford so long? We had this discussion decades ago when Porsche basically decided to do its first SUV, the Cayenne, and of course the Macan has followed it. And they were able to instill all of the basic DNA and then some into these two vehicles so that if you're hopping out of a 911 and hop into a Macan, there's a lot of the same sensations there, let alone the fact that they look very similar inside and out. And I really think that's what Ford has done here. And we've seen other very, very notable brands, exotic brands, do the same thing. Lamborghini, Aston Martin, brands that you never would have associated, not only with, you wouldn't have associated with them electric vehicles, you wouldn't have associated them with SUVs, and yet they're doing both. So I think this is the way forward, if I may paraphrase the Ford motto for a while, for brands to live again in a new world, a new automotive world, and keep them very relevant as they go ahead. So I'm glad Ford did it. They probably should have done it a little while ago, but they saved it all up for the Mach-E, and I think that's a good thing.
Somebody's commenting here that, yeah, it's in styling cues, but it still has 2 doors too many. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's true. But, you know, these days, what you call a coupe is and a fastback and all that is all muddied up, because if you look at the Europeans, they basically have brought out a slew of what they call 4-door coupes, where the back doors are pretty much disguised, and Ford has done that with the Mach-E. They actually don't even have door handles on the back doors, just the button. Even the front doors have minimal handles. And the way the roof is shaped, if you looked at it from a distance and you didn't know it was a 4-door hatchback, you probably wouldn't realize until you got pretty close. So I think they have disguised those rear doors in the same vein that the Europeans have very successfully done it at Mercedes and BMW and Audi. And, you know, it's, again, modern styling. It is basically crossing that divide. There's no question about it. But they've done it as painlessly to the eyes as they possibly could. And, of course, these days, if you don't have rear doors on an SUV, you might as well forget it. And Ford wanted to make the Mach-E very, very practical, along with everything else that there was in their on their goals list of goals. So, yeah, it's a 4-door. But, you know, if we turned around a few years from now and saw a 5-door regular Mustang, it wouldn't surprise me, and it also might be a good thing.
That's a great point. You know, you're talking about luxury SUVs. You mentioned Porsche, Audi, Mercedes, BMW, but what, in your mind, are there 5 key traits that the Mustang Mach-E stands out?
You know, that's a really good question, and I think there is. Yes, it's fast. All electric cars are fast, but Ford has gone beyond that. They not only made the Mach-E fast, they also allowed you to inject, and I admit it's not real, but some of the sounds of a traditional Mustang into the interior when you are accelerating. So they went beyond just making it fast. They wanted, again, to get some of that essence of the Mustang in there. I think the thing that blew all of us away is the handling. Yes, we know the current generation Mustang handles better than any Mustang before it, and they instilled a lot of that prowess into the handling and into the braking in the Mach-E. And what I really did want to say something about braking, because most people have not talked about it. The Mach-E does have regenerative braking to put some power back into the battery, but they've made it far less intrusive while keeping the brakes really strong, like you would expect in a high-performance version of the Mustang. I said the interior didn't exactly mirror the Mustang, but there's one area that it really does, and that is the seats. They are, yes, supportive, but they also basically have bolsters enough to hold you in the corners when you start basically getting a little aggressive. And when you're getting aggressive with an electric vehicle, you have to keep in mind you've got a lot of weight from the batteries, and it can actually throw you around and cause you to lose control easier than a similar internal combustion engine vehicle. Ford's taken that all into a consideration. between the wheel design and the seat design, right out of what you would expect in a car like the Mustang, with a lot of Mustang flavor, obviously. Did a great job. Number 4 would have to be the styling cues that I mentioned. Yeah, I know most models of the Mach-E don't even have a grille, but they've got the prancing horse up front. They've got along the sides the very definite character lines that in a profile almost match perfectly up to the current Mustang. You've got the silhouette, and around back, of course, you've got the tri-bar taillights on each side. And I think the final thing has to be the recognition that just like you can buy a Mustang at different levels, you can buy the Mach-E at different levels. You have the California version, you have the Premier version. Of course, you're going to have the GT version. What could you do with a Mustang without the GT? It wouldn't make sense. And that GT version will have more performance and all across the board than any other Mach-E. And I'm sure down the road, we're going to see even more extensions of that. So I think that's 5 things beside, and really the 6th is just, it was a blast to drive. But those 5 things, plus being a blast to drive, is what made it stand out for us.
So can you talk a little bit more about the tech? You mentioned a lot about performance and capability, but what about the interior and the tech design, even of the infotainment system and the interface?
Well, like most new EVs, and for that matter, non-EVs that we see coming out today, the centerpiece is a big screen. And it's a huge one in the Mach-E. And I have to admit that we're not huge fans of some of them. So when we got into the Mach-E, it was obviously something we wanted to see. What did Ford do? Here is a big screen interface that's actually been designed by engineers that understand drivers and ergonomics. It doesn't take 5 touches of the screen to get somewhere. A couple, yes, but that's understanding. The screen is sectioned off in areas that make very good common sense. And yet they've kept some of the controls, like some of the climate controls, up there all the time at the bottom, where you will also find the piece de resistance, a big volume knob that sticks right out. And it's the #1 beef of all automotive journalists when we get into a lot of the newer vehicles. They take away the volume knob. It makes that simple act time-consuming and very distraction-oriented. You can't keep your eyes on the road, and even though you've got the controls many times on the steering wheels, you just automatically reach for that center pod wherever the radio is. Ford did a great job of integrating all of that and keeping the ergonomics strong so that when you're using it, you just flat out don't feel that distracted. And that, when you don't feel distracted in a vehicle, you get to maintain that feeling of being one with it more. And that is a central core of the Mustang. When you drive a Mustang, you are surrounded by performance. And I think they tried to keep some of that essence in the Mach-E more than they probably had to. The only thing missing, and this is a little bit of a beef, when you put it into the unbridled mode, it would have been nice if the gauge package in front of you, it actually popped up with a couple of round gauges to let you know you were in a traditional Mustang. But that aside, that's really about my only beef. And the material quality, it's absolutely first rate. It's very above what you would expect in a Mustang level vehicle.
So David from Facebook is asking, this kind of goes along with that point, John, he's asking, how is the fit and the finish of the Mach-E?
Well, the vehicle we had was an early build, but I have to say, having said that, it was excellent. I'm always looking for where things don't line up quite perfectly, and because my training has actually involved a lot of ergonomics and designing aircraft interiors. So I'm looking for that, and we didn't find any. I wouldn't say that the vehicle we had was completely indicative of what's going to come off the assembly line, because it was one that the press was using for testing. But at the same time, it did come out of that same plant. So my first impression was very strong. And I put a lot of credence in how materials feel They have to look good, but then they should also feel good. And I thought that the Ford did an excellent job of that.
So let's talk a little bit about range. You know, with any kind of electric
Yeah.
vehicle, there's a lot of people that have range anxiety. So it could be a bit daunting if you want to make that jump to a full electric vehicle. So, you know, even if you're used to driving a gas or even a hybrid vehicle, I mean, why should people consider an electric vehicle? And can you talk a little bit about specifically the Mach-E's range?
Well, I think that's a great question because it is a huge stumbling block. You remember it was only a few years ago when Chevrolet came out with the Bolt EV that we kind of crossed that 200-mile range barrier in a reasonably priced SUV or a reasonably priced EV. And that immediately ratcheted up the expectation to 300 miles. And here you have the Mach-E, which a lot of people thought would be way under 300 because when you look around the world at other high performance electric vehicles, they're in the 230, the 220, the 230 range. So when Ford managed to actually beat the 300-mile range on one model of the Mach-E and do 270 for the all-wheel drive version, I think that made everybody stand up and take notice. And it's not just the raw number. You have to remember that people are going to try and take at least day trips with these vehicles. I don't think they're really satisfactory for a 600 and 700 and 800-mile range trip yet, although you could certainly do it. But when you go out even on a day trip, as I did in the Mach-E, I wanted to make sure that about halfway I was able to top it off. I found a DC fast charger. We spent about 40 minutes or less, I think it was, to actually recharge it. But when you find those chargers, they only charge you quickly up to 80% of maximum. So if your maximum's 270, you're only going to get 80% of that. Now you're down to a level where you're saying that's about what the Bolt EV did at its full range. So you still start to think about range anxiety, but you need to give yourself as much margin as you can, knowing that you're only going to get 80% of it back using a fast charger. Now, I hope that's not too complex, but that's why 300, which in turn at 80% is going to be what, 240, makes a reasonable is a reasonable range to start with, because you know when you recharge it, you're still going to have a reasonable range left. And of course, this is just the beginning. Now that we're at 300 for reasonably priced vehicles, 400 is going to be the next level. As a matter of fact, Tesla, I think, is the first vehicle to get an EPA rating of 400 miles on a range. But we're going up from there. And I guess the ultimate goal is probably 500 or 600 miles. So range anxiety is disappearing. It is disappearing faster than a couple of years ago I thought it would. But we're certainly to the place now where you can drive an EV like the Bolt or most any of them as daily drivers 5 days a week, charge it up at home and not worry about it. We're still not quite to the long distance drive, but we're getting there pretty fast. And I intend to take my Mach-E, and yes, I have, after we picked it for the awards and all that said and done, I did actually go out and put my hard-earned money down on one. And I plan to take trips with it up and down the East Coast. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, keep us posted. That is exciting. And so, you know, you mentioned a little bit about what people should look for when they're, you know, purchasing a Mach-E or considering purchasing a Mach-E. Anything else you want to mention before we kind of talk a little bit more about the general economy and how the pandemic has affected it?
I think the Mach-E, yes, it's a standalone vehicle. It's a terrific piece of work, but it's indicative of what's going on. Automakers are embracing the electrification of the automobile, and it doesn't mean just pure EVs. It means, very importantly, plug-in hybrids. But at the same time, they're recognizing that they can't walk away from certain things that a lot of consumers value, which is the ability for the vehicle to look great, the ability for the vehicle to carry a lot of cargo, for it to handle very well. They're not just looking for electric vehicles that have no personality. Personality is still hugely important to most buyers of vehicles in this country. So I'm not depressed about this revolution that's going on, but I also have to say, I think that saying that internal combustion engines are going to somehow fade away very quickly is probably not accurate. And so if you're a lover of the V8s, I think you're still going to be able to buy V8s and V6s for a while more. It's just that you may also find a little electric motor in there some way to help them be even more efficient and environmentally friendly. So I'm very excited about where the automotive world is headed. And I think the Mach-E is a spearhead for that, but there's a lot more to come.
That's exciting. Thanks so much for that perspective, John. So yeah, now let's dive in a little bit more about, how this pandemic has affected just, auto sales in general, the economy. What are your thoughts on where, things are headed, and what can you share some future predictions perhaps on where we're going to be ahead of this, maybe this summer, maybe next fall? What are you looking at?
Well, I do think that, let's go back to a little 11 months ago. The predictions were, oh my goodness, auto sales are going to be off 80%. This is going to be the most horrendous year on record. None of that came true. I think maybe for a month, they counted out the critics. They didn't know the business. They didn't know the incredibly scrappy dealers that knew they had to figure out how to keep all of their people employed. And they were very, very quick to figure out proper ways and new ways to sell vehicles. We already had people delivering cars, to people's homes, but all of a sudden it started to mushroom. And along with that, more ways of essentially buying a vehicle with very little in-person communication. Test drives, more and more, those are happening at homes. But even for people who want to go into the dealerships, the cleanliness of dealerships, the ability to talk to the sales consultants without being very close to them, the ability to continue having your car serviced in an efficient manner. All of that ramped up very, very quickly. So really by April and May, a lot of that was in place and sales came back like gangbusters. I have a friend that works at a big dealership group. And, by the early summer, they couldn't keep the popular models in stock. The problem wasn't at the dealership level. It was at the manufacturing level, and they were quickly getting their hands around that. So I think the auto industry has shown amazing resilience. And yes, 2020 was down, but it wasn't down anything like the predictions of 11 months ago. And probably at the end of 2021, we'll probably be about back, pretty close to where we were in 2019. And do I think we're going to go up from there? I don't know. We've had some very heady years lately, but I don't see the industry collapsing, even if the economy takes a pause. I think buyers understand they want new vehicles, and that the dealers have figured out how to deliver even in adversities. I'm actually pretty bullish on the auto industry for the next few years, especially with a lot of the new technology coming along. So
you talked a bit about the dealerships. And so I work for a dealer association out of the Chicago area, and I know firsthand what they're doing to keep people safe and to keep business booming. But what are you seeing? What kind of trends across the nation are you seeing in regards to different processes or protocols, maybe more digital focused, or what else are you seeing?
Well, I think a lot of the dealerships really didn't want to embrace the idea of digital sales. Yes, they had websites and you could, talk about prices over them, but it was really, they considered that just like a minor part of they really wanted you in the showroom. Well, that's all changed. And I don't think that's going to change back. There are some people that will, I don't believe you should buy a car without physically test driving the car you're going to drive. So this idea that all of a sudden we're not going to have to test drive cars anymore, we're just going to buy them over the internet, that was there before the pandemic. I think that's still kind of ridiculous. Maybe a few people will do that, but most people are still going to have some in-person interaction. But a lot of people just frankly don't like the going into the dealer to the buying experience. They feel pressured. They're feeling less pressure doing it at home, and the dealers have now set up systems to accommodate them and even encourage it in some situations. So I think we have turned a big page in the retailing of automobiles, both new and used. And I think probably for the consumer, it's much for the better.
I think that's great. And anything that can make it easier on the consumer is fantastic. I know a lot of the dealers, just from the delivery
Yes.
process of the vehicles too, just bringing it to and from their home, and just the convenience that, that puts on the consumer that is definitely a positive that has come out of this. I would definitely agree with you.
And think about it, before the pandemic, that was kind of reserved for luxury vehicles and only a few brands there. Now it's going to be across the board.
Great point. I mean, on that note, do you think that now is a good time to buy if the means are there for folks, or should they kind of wait to see what else is coming out? I feel like there's been so many vehicles that have debuted over this past year that no one's really been able to see in person yet.
We basically just, that's where the lack of auto shows, I think, is hurting the consumers. Yeah, we took a pause in new vehicle introductions for a few months, but it's been basically full speed ahead since say September, and all of it really has been virtual. There have been a few in-person things, but not many. So it's all been virtual. There are a lot of vehicles out there that consumers haven't seen. A lot of new SUVs. Right now, the consumer seems most interested in multi-purpose vehicles. Gas is still cheap, so they're buying large pickup trucks, large SUVs, but SUVs of all size, which were already popular, now seem to be really the vehicle that most people want. So I don't see away from SUVs and pickup trucks, but if anything, the pandemic has caused that to pick up speed because people had, frankly, their home, they had time to do more research on their own, and they probably had a little bit more free time to actually go out and do some shopping. That's why I think the market came back as strong as it did. Interest rates are low, so all of the ingredients you need there are on the consumer side. And because volume has been hurt a bit, I think it is still a buyer's market.
Yeah, and interesting you note the trends a little bit shifting from, SUVs are still hot, but maybe people now are purchasing larger SUVs because they're taking more road trips with their family. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, I was going to mention that. Thank you for doing that because I forgot. But yes, you can't basically fly places, but you sure as heck can get into a comfortable vehicle and drive to them. And Americans like to drive. If you're in Europe, if you drive 150 to 200 miles to something, that's a big deal. They just don't normally do that. They'll take a train for long distances. Here, Americans don't think of anything of driving 4 or 5 and even 600 or more miles a day for a vacation spot. And you want to do it in comfort. And if you've got a big SUV or a 4-door full-size pickup truck, you do it. And so I think that's fueling a lot of that popularity. Plus the technology that's going in to these new vehicles, it's astounding. Again, you used to find it only in luxury automobiles. Now it's across the board.
That's a great point. So we've talked a lot about the Mach-E. We've talked a lot about why the market is shifting to larger SUVs. But can you talk a little bit about some of the other awards that you were providing to the other automakers and some of the vehicles that stood out in your Driver's Choice Awards?
Certainly. One of the things that sets our Driver's Choice Awards apart from a lot of others is we pick winners in distinct categories that people actually buy. So I'll run down the list really, really quickly. We started Best Small Car. A lot of people are still interested in entry-level vehicles. This year, for the second year in a row, it was the Mazda 3, which is a terrific lineup of vehicles. And every year, Mazda keeps improving them. But what we like about them is they may be small and they may be efficient, but they are basically great packages that are fun to drive. Our big winner for the family sedan area, best family sedan, the Kia K5. This is the replacement for the Optima. It shares a lot of componentry with the Hyundai Sonata, which won the award last year. But the K5, again, all-wheel drive. It's a great package with lots of interior room. So even though sedan sales are down, this vehicle is a giant bargain for what you get for the money. And again, it drives great. Best luxury sedan. Luxury means lots of things to different people. We think the Acura TLX embodies our idea of luxury, which is, yeah, it's comfortable, super comfortable. It really pampers you. But again, when you turn that wheel, it responds. Great machine. Best sports sedan, Mercedes-AMG CLA 35. What's a big deal about this one? It's the smallest vehicle in the sedan category that Mercedes sells here. And with the the AMG treatment to it, the CLA 35, it's just a little rocket ship. And it's very, very affordable. The Toyota GR Supra. They took a great car and made it better by giving you an entry-level four-cylinder model and doing some really nice improvements, especially in power, for the six-cylinder vehicle. Best performance car, anything that's got a Porsche 718 on it. We really think the 718 is the embodiment of what the 911 was, say, for when I first started doing MotorWeek back in the 80s. The quintessential sports car, either coupe or convertible, and it's just a terrific piece of work. And if you're looking for an aspirational sports car that's not crazy priced, it's expensive. We know. Best small utility. Everybody wants to know about utilities. A new entry here, the Ford Bronco Sport. This is the escaped-based Bronco Sport, not the truck-based Bronco that will come later. Lots of utility in a package. Reminds me really of the old XJ Jeep Cherokees. A nice square package that's very, very practical, and in this case will go just about anywhere. Best midsize utility, the rebirth of the Land Rover Defender. Yeah, it doesn't look like that old Defender 90 and 110, but it can go places those never dreamed of. A great job for Land Rover. Best large utility, you mentioned yourself, all new. A lot of people haven't seen it. The Chevrolet Tahoe and Suburban, our best large utilities. If you're in the market for a full-size SUV truck base, that's the one to look at. They really have beat all comers. Best luxury utility, second year for the Mercedes-Benz GLE, largely because they've also added a coupe-like version to it, a four-door with a hatchback. Best midsize truck, that's a new category for us. Lots of people out there have been clamoring for it. We gave it to the Honda Ridgeline. Yeah, it may be based on a Honda car-like chassis, but it does everything you want in a small pickup, and yet has that comfort and reliability that Honda is well known for. Best full-size truck, best-selling vehicle in the world, in the country, the Ford F-150. We're just knocked out by all the varieties of powertrains and the new onboard generators. Best eco-friendly, I mentioned, the Ford Mustang Mach-E. And very quickly, our money is no object vehicles. If you win that Powerball, the Bentley Flying Spur, it goes so fast and it's so opulent, you just can't believe it. You're still on the earth. The Aston Martin DBX, their first entry into the SUV, and the ultimate dream machine for most car aficionados, the Porsche 911 Turbo, and it is certainly for us. You can find all of those on our website at motorweek.org. So I'm not sure how long that took, but there you go.
Thanks, John. I want to address some questions. That's perfect. I want to address some questions before we wrap up here. A few came in through the chat. So first off, what's the best pickup truck price under $30,000? Do you have an answer for that?
Well, it's really tough to find a pickup truck under $30,000. I'm not sure. I can't tell you what the base price of the Ridgeline is, but even if you could get a Ridgeline that's a year older, that would be one that I would look at very, very closely. I also think that the current Ford Ranger, which has been around now for a couple of years, I think that's a very interesting vehicle, and I like the S10 too. If I was picking the best, I think I'd still be gravitating towards the least expensive Ridgeline I could get.
Okay, great. So William's asking, the full blown off-road truck market is hot. Do you think GM's going to challenge the TRX Ram or the Ford Raptor? It's a great question.
You know, I don't know. They haven't yet, and they haven't really been making moves in that direction. Right now, I think we're more interested to see what Ford's actually going to do with the new Raptor to get it up to the TRX level. The TRX is certainly an amazing piece of work, Once you drive it, yeah, it's got a lot of power, but it basically takes care of you on and off road. But Chevrolet so far really hasn't stretched themselves in that direction. They seem to be more concerned about vehicles that actually work tough and allow people to just do what they need to do every day. I mean, after all, they've taken back the second place truck crown, so they must be doing something right. But right now, nothing from GM on that. It seems to me they may be waiting for the electric version of their full-size pickup trucks to go after that kind of performance.
Okay, great. So Roger's asking, what's your opinion on the future of the Chevy Camaro?
Well, that's a good question because there have been some rumors, but I think the Camaro is going to go through a transformation. I believe there are probably some plans deep within General Motors to electrify it in some way, shape, or form, just like we hear rumors about an electric Corvette. I don't think they're going to discontinue it. I would hate to see that happen. The pony cars like the Camaro and the Mustang really are core to the American automotive psyche. So I'd like to see them redesign it. I think it needs to be brought up to date a little bit more. But I haven't heard anything really about it going away. I hope I don't.
Okay, great. So just a couple more questions we'll answer here. Anyone who's listening, just feel free to type them in the comments. David's wondering, what effect do you think the expansion of EVs will have on the classic car market?
I think it's going to make anything with a really big internal combustion engine more popular. And I'm actually, thinking that if you've got a really nice, Mustang or whatever it is, or Challenger or Charger, you name it, keep it up. Keep the body work without dings. Make sure the engine stays clean, because you've probably got a future classic and not that many years down the road sitting in your driveway right now. I think there's going to be a big demand for a non-turbocharged V8 and maybe a few V6 powertrains as we go further down the line. And cars we might not normally have thought about being collectible might well turn out to be collectible.
Great. Well, John, what's your opinion about the new Cadillac Lyriq?
I like the way it looks. I think Cadillac, being the spearhead electric division for General Motors, makes some sense, but I'm kind of going to be watching to see that they don't leave Chevrolet out of the mix, especially after they did such a great job with the Bolt EV. The Cadillac recent design language has sometimes run hot and cold for me. They used to call it art and science, but I don't think they even call it that anymore. But I do like the Lyriq. It looks great inside, which I think is an area that Cadillac really needed to do a lot of work on. I have not seen it in person, but I'm looking forward to it. But what I've seen so far, I like.
Great. Now this is a little bit assumptive, but William's wondering, how disappointed were you with the new Chevy Blazer? Were you in fact disappointed? And if you were, why?
Yeah, I was. I was kind of hoping they would go kind of the Bronco route, go back and give us a truck frame-based vehicle that was ready. But instead, they basically gave us another very, very nice and very stylish crossover SUV. And really, when I look at the Blazer and I think about the rumors that Corvette was going to do an SUV, to me, that's what it would have looked like. So I think it's probably the closest thing you could get to a Corvette-styled utility vehicle. And for that reason, I think it's extremely desirable. But I would have liked to have seen them basically bite the bullet and go a little retro and get a little more down and dirty and have something comparable to the Bronco. Because everybody knew the Bronco was coming. It wasn't a secret.
No, it was not.
It's true. I've never seen a vehicle get more pre-publicity.
No kidding. No kidding. It was a long time coming. So we have a couple more questions that I'll address. And if anyone else has any questions, just feel free to continue to put them in the comments, and maybe John can go back and answer a few of them at a later time. But these are some great questions, so we want to just keep this going. So Jill wants to know, when will you test drive the 2021 Santa Fe Limited 2.5T all-wheel drive and the 2021 Kia Sorento SX all-wheel drive?
I think within the next 60 days is my guess on those. We've seen them, of course, but they haven't been into test fleets yet. And we, unlike, when you don't have the pandemic, you get a chance to test and drive things at the manufacturer's shows, or if you're located near where their headquarters are, which we're not in this case. So, but Kia and Hyundai are very good about getting vehicles to the East Coasters like us. So I think within the next 30 to 60 days, you'll see them on MotorWeek. I don't have a list in front of me of what's coming, but right now with the snow, we've actually canceled a number of vehicles because we just can't test them properly right now.
No, that makes sense. So Corey wants to know Volkswagen Golf or Honda Civic?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think you have to think about form and function. I don't think any vehicle on this planet does a better job of packaging, giving you the most interior space for the exterior room than a Volkswagen Golf. I think they've also done a remarkable job with models like the R, of course, in putting a great deal of performance into a vehicle that really originally wasn't designed to be anything like a performance vehicle. On the other hand, if you really want to be noticed and you want a vehicle that, pardon the phrase, has a lot of sex appeal, it's the Civic in all of its iterations has got a great deal of that. Even the standard Civic sitting there is a beautifully styled automobile. And then when you start ratcheting up to the performance models, it gets even more so. So I think whether you want to be totally practical and have fun, because the Golf does drive like a German car, which is terrific, or you want a little more flash, that's the decision you have to make. So get in them and see which one you can see out of best and just feels right the best around you.
Okay, and Jeff wants to know, what's your opinion of the 2021 Audi S7?
It's a very, very impressive model that I think when you walk up to it, you're not really sure on how it's going to respond. You look at it and think, maybe this is a little too big for the kind of performance that it promises you. But when you get in it, because right now I think Audi has the best interiors on the planet, and you're surrounded by all of this technology with this lace of performance put on top of everything they do. And then you hit the start button and you take off, and the car throws you back in your seat, and it's so rewarding to drive. And it feels much smaller than it actually is, that it bowls you over. It's a vehicle that you have to drive to really appreciate the level of technology that's been put into it. So looks alone will draw you to it, but to drive it makes you sign on the dotted line. It's another one of those vehicles that you really have to drive before you really understand it.
Very well put. Do you have time, John, for just two more questions?
Sure.
This is such a great discussion that I hate to end it, but so Mark is wondering, you guys did such a great review of the 1998 Lincoln Continental. Do you believe that vehicle will become a classic? Great question.
That's a good question. To some degree, but I don't think, it was, until they did the special versions of it, it didn't have the rear opening doors, what we used to call suicide doors. And I think that had a lot to do with making, the 60s vintage Continentals such classics. Generally speaking, when a vehicle is not that popular, it doesn't end up being a classic. And I think when they designed the Continental, it was a terrific idea. But the 98 Continental, I don't know. I'm actually thinking about even the newest Continental that didn't have the suicide doors, and I don't think that's going to be a classic. And I'm really not sure that the 98 will stand the test of time either. So I'm sorry, Mark, if I got a little off the wavelength there. The 98 was certainly one of the last of its breed, and I think it will have some value, but I don't think it's going to be this huge collectible that you're just going to see the price increase forever. like a lot of the stuff from the 60s.
Okay, so we're gonna have time for one more question, but again, if there's any questions that have come through, hopefully John can go back later and address some of those. But Corey wants to know, and I think this is a kind of a great way to sum up the discussion in terms of trends. What about the wagon? You mentioned it earlier. Where is that going? Will that see a resurgence in America?
Corey, it already has. We've just given them 2 inches more ground clearance and put all-wheel drive on them. That's what a crossover utility is. I don't care what anybody tells you. It is the modern interpretation of a wagon. Don't want all-wheel drive? Most of them are available as in front-wheel drive, a few in rear-wheel drive as well. That is the modern station wagon. But to answer your question, for the lower Subaru Outback type station wagon, I don't think it's going to make a comeback. Even Subaru has been, increasingly jacking up the Outback to make it look less and less like a traditional wagon. I think that that's probably dead and buried. They're still making some of them in Europe, of course, but I don't think we're going to see it here. Our version of the wagon is the CUV, the crossover utility vehicle.
Well, thanks so much, John. So remind everybody where they can go if they did not yet see the MotorWeek Driver's Choice Award show.
Well, the first thing you do, since it's debuting this weekend on public television stations around the country, is check your local PTV station. You can go onto our website at motorweek.org. In the upper right corner, it says about the show. Pull it down. There's a station listing button there. Put in your zip code, and you can see where it's showing near you. A week from this coming Tuesday, will also be up on the MotorTrend cable channel, or in actually, you can go to our website and see a lot of the driver's choice information right now, but we'll also have the full driver's choice segments up on our MotorWeek YouTube channel, youtube.com/MotorWeek next week. So if you've got a screen, you can find us.
Perfect.
We hope you do.
And thanks so much, John, for taking the time to talk with me out of your busy schedule and answering all of the questions that have come through the chat. So we really appreciate it. And hopefully one day soon we can see each other in person at an auto show and experience all these vehicles.
Thank you very much, Jen, for letting me come on today. Say hello to everybody there in Chicago. We really miss being there this year, and we hope to see you in February, snow or no, in 2022.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.